the biggest enemy of our industry is that we used to things. We used to fit into certain organizational models, and we used to develop certain marketing plans, and we used to execute certain things. And if we always look back of what we have used to, then it's not going to help us to build the future. And when it all comes down to marketing and marketing communication, I'm always raising my hand, is like, let's step back a little and think about branding first. So the good news is that every marketeer can become a really good brand expert. It's a matter of choice, whether we want to dig deeper or not. And I'm privileged at DDB because they identified that for our clients, they needed to have someone who digs deeper. So I'm usually the one that no one really likes to talk to at the beginning, but at the very end, they all realize that it's a good conversation when I'm involved. So the common point is that I think, whether if it's marketing or communication, I used to redefine it at market interaction. So if you think about what you gotta do, and you think about it in a very classical way of how you got to interact within a market, then you're no longer going to call it marketing, you're going to call it market interaction. And within this interaction, that's a shift from A to B. But the way how you shift certain messages and get certain things across, I think branding should be on a higher level. And I'm glad when companies recognize the importance of fusing PR and marketing. But what I don't understand why they leverage branding above all and put all of them under branding. But I think it's a different conference. So the good news is it's a multi-dimensional playground. So I just wanted to give you some food for thought that these conferences are really good, that we all stop for a little while and we think of why we're doing things. Content marketing is important, but what is more important is not to call it content marketing, but call it purpose-driven marketing. As long as you step back and you see your purpose, and you see the purpose of your brand, and you see why the heck are we doing all this, then you understand that if you set your whys, then the hows and the what will follow, and it will follow in the right manner. So it's always a question of push or pull, and I always say, marketing and sales is push and branding is pull, because there is an organic attention from our customers that they either get into your way, or you can try to push them as hard as possible, but if they don't resonate with you, they're never going to follow. But the good news for product managers, I don't know if there's any of it here, that if there's no product or service, there's never a brand. So step number one, get your product right, and start thinking about how to build that brand. I called it a multi-dimensional playground, and we used to say brand is very emotional and product is a rational dimension. So when you look at two of these dimensions, I think it's our and your responsibility how you fit these two dimensions into your organization. We used to be in Japan with Anka on one of the seminars, and one of our professors in Japan said that the hardest part is with building emotional dimensions and innovations is that it's following an illogical flow. And he's so right. Organizations are built on a logic. So when you come with magic, the question is, how are you going to feed that magic into your organizational logic? So I think I was invited today just to bring you this kind of question and answers so we can debate on how we can leverage that and how can we use that kind of emotional driven marketing and turn it into data, and that data can fuel those logics so then your organization will not freak out but will let that stream into your business. The interesting thing is what I've learned, that before everything gets into the branding level, we gotta make sure that we do the prerequisites and we have great products. So do great services and products on the product level. But when we talk about products, people tend to always focus on only one level of product, which is actually the actual product, how it looks, what the features are. So I'm always promoting to focus on 3 levels of the product. The actual core of the product, which is the purpose. Get the purpose right, why your product exists, what it delivers, what needs does it answer to. And then product level number 2 is the actual product with all the features of how it looks like. And they usually tend to forget the augmented product levels. Augmented product levels could be mixed up a lot of times with branding, but it has nothing to do with branding. But what I tend to find out that the more we pay attention to augmented product levels are all the additional services that are intangible. And because they're intangible, because if you go for a loan and you get an additional service, if you buy a car and you get additional warranties, car repair, these are all the augmented additional benefits that you receive with your core product. And sometimes brand managers try to believe that their augmented services are about to give a great story. And these are going to be the core of their brand stories. And I gotta disagree with that, and I think it's our task to challenge ourselves and dig deeper in a dimensional phase. So when you have these 3 levels of products, then you go, okay, I'm getting better at building a brand. So my brand will be a great navigator. A great navigator because in today's customer environment, when you look at all the shoppers and all the choices, who's going to navigate them? And the answer is simple, it's going to be our brand. What we got to make sure is that the amount of time and money we invest into brands, and you look at your brand equity, it's supposedly shouldn't be higher than what the brand delivers at the end of the day. But if you follow the rules nicely, then those brands will worth it. I attended lately some of the conferences, and they always try to challenge me and say, Tom, what do you think brand has influenced our sales? Or how could brand building influence our sales and marketing? And I always say that I truly believe that brands can directly influence pricing, but brands cannot directly influence your sales and marketing. But I believe that product could be the great feature of your sales. And good news for all the creative and advertising agencies here. I think the volume of what clients are expecting comes from great storytelling and comes from advertising. But the brand equity that we try to build, I think it has a direct influence on sales, because that's the surplus that everybody is willing to pay for your brand. So when you have discussions at your organizations and you try to go to the discount level and see fast solutions, don't go there, because we know as soon as you get into the trap of discounts and lowering your prices and destroying your brand equity that you cannot convert into cash, then you're no longer going to be you're no longer going to be in the game on the long run. So the takeout from these presentations is this. Saturated markets here in Romania, when you have fairly stable market shares and there are big players, especially in the banking sector, how can you achieve a larger market share? It's almost impossible, or it's not impossible, but it's a very big challenge. But if your brand equity is right and you can cash that surplus that your customers are willing to pay to follow your brand, this is where you can increase your profit without even generating a category growth. So the importance of having a great brand manager in your organization or hiring brand strategy people is because of that. If you need a logic to be followed, then the logic is very simple. Fight for your market share, because that's one dimension, but when you're stuck in it, your brand is the only navigator for your customer, and your brand is the only navigator for all of you that you know that you can cash as a surplus. So sales and marketing, I used to call it is the IQ, and branding is the EQ. And trade marketing managers and brand managers can fight about that. So when it all comes down to branding, I thought that I would put together slides for you that would give you certain interpretations of branding, because what I've learned so far, whenever I attend a conference, that when it comes to branding, everybody says, oh yeah, so we know it. So everybody knows it, but nobody really goes back to the basics. And I think conferences as such are a great platform that we just peel all the used to things down and we just focus on the core essence. And we just don't say, yeah, we know it, but we know that we don't really deal with it. So the advice for today is that when it comes to branding, try to dig deeper, because if you dig deeper and you get your whys and you get your core and you follow that, even though it sounds stupid sometimes, and marketing directors can go really crazy because it's a slower process, but it'll pay off at the very end. So for me, branding and the way that I interpret branding, it's a matter of relationship. It's a relationship between a certain brand and its customers. It's a relationship that is happening, but only, and that's why I put proximity, only if it is within a calculated proximity. Touchpoint strategy. Get your place and time right. If the relationship is happening within a space, within a time zone that is calculated for our customers, then they care. If something is happening outside your space zone, outside certain touch points, you just simply don't care because it's not affecting you. And probability. There are millions of promotions out there. It's a very cheap call when you think that just because you're giving added value through certain promotions, then this is how you raise interest. But then you're going to have a high peak and then it drops again. So your brand will always depend on promotions and touch points and creative activities. Then you know that something's wrong. So probability is very important, because if I know that one person can win a Mercedes at the end of the day, you know that the probability of you to win is basically very low. So you're not going to follow a brand who use these kind of cards. So out of, let's say, place, time, probability, emotion is something that has further levels. I told you at the beginning that branding is a multi-dimensional playground, which is so cool because you can set the barriers of these dimensions. So if the first one was looking at the product on all the 3 levels, and if the second was looking at what proximity all the branding is happening, I think the third one will be the emotional proximity. So I don't know if you're familiar with, but are there any P&G people here? Because they must be with the customer disposition funnel. But what I'm trying to do is, with the emotional proximity, they call it emotional proximity 5A. So what they basically say, when you look at your customers, and you look at a ladder of accepted, approved, agreed, appreciated, and admired, that these are the 5 stages that emotionally your customers could be. And when you pair it, or you draw a parallel, you could draw a parallel of the customer disposition, which is considering of buying your brand, trial, retire, regular, and loyal. And if you pair that two, you will find out that your customer's emotional stage and their willingness of purchasing your brand and repurchasing your brand, or feeling even more connected to your brand, has some kind of an influence of the emotional stage that they are in with your brand. So, if anybody asks you, what the hell is brand equity, then just say 2 things. It's commitment and category involvement. With commitment, you can go back to the emotional proximities and you can see your customer stages. With the commitment is what we assume that our customers are willing to commit to what we do. In reality, they don't give a damn. In the future, they could if we listen. So it's always a listen, learn, response matrix, but when you gotta work on your brand equity, because you want to do something sustainable, you know? It's not sure that you're in your marketing position for more than 5, 10, 12, 15 years, but if you're lucky enough, you could do good things even in a shorter period of time. So when you look at brand equity, look at the commitment and look at certain category involvements. Banking, I always refer to your previous presentation. Banking, for instance, is in a very difficult position because the category involvement generally for banking products is pretty low. We don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh my god, I want to get a loan or let's see how my credit card works today, or oh, let's check out the Facebook application because I'm so into banking. So the category involvement is low, so when you know that your category involvement is low, you know exactly that you have to work on a commitment level. You have to bring emotion into data. You have to use emotions as data, and you have to make sure that that storytelling is working pros and cons, because you're coming from a field where originally your category involvement is low. So you could be representing companies that are having high category involvement, which is good, because you know that your customers are waking up with your product and they go to bed with your product. But if you're coming from a field that it doesn't work that way, then you know exactly which part to work on when you work on your brand equity. So, it's a multi-dimensional playground, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the dimensions of whether you create values and how you capture these values. It's going to be whether your brand worth a price premium, which will help you to establish a great profitable income, but then what's the relation with your market share? And the third dimension is whether your customers or potential shoppers are satisfied and loyal. So when you look at all these three dimensions again, because it's another layer of dimensions, you know you're doing a good job. Attention to the satisfaction and loyalty. Seriously, many companies are looking at satisfaction attributes. They're going to their research company and they're usually tracking likability factors, satisfaction with their product and service. Satisfaction doesn't mean that I'm loyal. It means that I could have a high satisfaction, but it doesn't mean that I will be loyal if I get a similar offer from someone. So I wanted to point it out that your playground is always outlined by these kind of debates of value, price, satisfaction, loyalty. And at the end of the day, is it possible to see what's on this chart? I don't know if you can see anything, because I can hardly see it. It's my mania to put together a chart at the end of each presentation. And the point of this one, to make people understand that when you're working on your brand equity, at the end of the day, it's always going to be a psychological and a psychomagical and a systematical source. And I call it psychomagical because for thoughts and imaginations, which is the source of inspiration for every brand, it's a magic. That's why people tend to get upset when they're sitting at boardrooms and marketing presentations, because how are you defining magic? And how are you defining love? It's the same thing. You think you're in love, and you have no rationalization of that feeling, but when they break up with you, you know exactly how to rationalize that. You seek for answers. So that's the psychomagical part. The psychological part is easy. It's basically the benefits that brands can give you and the certain associations that brands can evoke. The knowledge, the experience, and the emotion. So that's what I call source of value on the logic flow. On the inspiration flow, I call it psychomagical, because you're gathering all the thoughts and imaginations that your brands can evoke. And the systematical part is basically the homework. Distinction, differentiation, identification. Your brand's got to be identified. And it's another conference, probably, and another speech, whether distinctiveness or differentiation is more important. But if you ask me, I think both, but differentiation would never last as long as distinctiveness. So when you think that the amount of investment that you pull together for your creative work and for your trademark and for your visible appearance, don't think twice, because that distinction will last longer than the USP or the differentiation of your brand. So we started to, the first slide was stop the clock is not a race, because I believe you always have to stop and think. And I always believe that creativity is about thinking.